Uprising, Curse of the Last Emperor first appeared on my radar 4 years ago. As a small first-time publisher, Nemesis Games appeared to be taking a bold entry into the board game world and promising a full-fledged cooperative 4X game set in a post-apocalyptic world. Since its initial launch, it has received 2 large expansions and managed to improve its already spectacular presentation with an even more deluxified set of add-on components and supplements, bringing a myriad of new strategic options to the experience. Over time, and since receiving the game and its expansions, I've experienced it catapulting onto my top 10 games of all time, and eventually even displacing my favorite genre of dungeon crawls, slipping into my number 1 game of all time, which is no easy accomplishment, especially given how short a period of time this game has been out. How did this game manage to elevate itself so quickly? In today's interview with Nemesis Games, I intend to get into the minds of 2 of the 3 lead developers of Uprising to discover the source of the magic. For a brief history of my reviews of Uprising, check out the links in the description. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and if the music you are hearing now seems like it would be fitting for a 4X fantasy experience, let me know, as I may just be making some post-apocalyptic sounds to accompany your battles in the future. And now, without further ado, here are Cornelius and Dirk from Nemesis Games. Okay, so welcome everybody. Today, this is Jazz Paladin, and I'm here with Nemesis Games, led by here Cornelius, Cremin, and Dirk Sommer, visiting on this call from Germany. So welcome to guys. Today we'll be discussing how to make an authentic German schnitzel for the next half hour, right? I figured what better treat for game night, right? So leave it to the pros here. Now, talking about Uprising, Curse of the Last Emperor, which I've covered pretty extensively over the past few years, and just kind of getting to know the minds behind it and the reason for the mechanics, everything about the game here. Welcome, guys.
Jazz Paladin, nice to meet you. Thanks for having us. When you wrote us and asked if you wanted to come on for a show, I was really excited because you are one of the people in the audience who think is a real expert, and I love nothing more to talk Uprising with an expert.
Great. Well, let's get started.
We have that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. No problem. I look forward to this. A lot of questions, so let's get this ball rolling here.
Let's go.
First of all, you made a 4X game. Why wasn't this one a space theme?
That was definitely the biggest thing we kept encountering, because all 4X games are space games, right?
Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Civilization, like the video game, is like maybe the classicest 4X that ever 4X'd. But even that doesn't like necessarily have a fantasy theme. So I don't know. It's maybe it was also a little hard for us to squeeze it together. I think that there is something about space and the unknown, which is a bit terrible and weird. And in a fantasy land, maybe it's not, like you expect what's going to come around the corner. And so maybe that's one of the reasons the hexes are so horrible when you explore them. Something alien and terrifying happens.
Yeah.
To keep the space vibe, because that should be a big moment in a game. I think Dirk and I both loved that after playing Eclipse. We said, like, we have to have flipping hexes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, I think, like, even though the 2 of us we love sci-fi for sure, like huge Star Wars fans, but we are still bigger, a lot of the Ring nerds, I would guess. So like at least for me, Cornelius, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like fantasy is just a little bit closer to our hearts, and since we made the game for us basically, so we wanted to make the game that we wanted to play. We wanted to make the best game that we love the most, so we stuck with fantasy.
Yeah, I agree. The moral realm has no place in space, but it definitely lives in the fantasy world.
That's true. I could see that being that part of that conflict more on a fantasy realm rather than space, where everything's just kind of gray anyways. So, yeah. How long did you guys spend developing the game? I think I know the answer to this, but for those who don't know, how long was it in pre-production and in idea phase before you implemented your first crowdfund?
I would say like 5 to 6 years. It's like back in the fog of time. It gets blurry, but it was a long time. It's at least 5 years, more like to 6, and then like with the aftermath of the Kickstarter, which we still kept, of course, refining and developing and playtesting. We were quite obsessed. It was very funny if I'm allowed to tell the story, Cornelius. Like when we first decided to do this, but like we had a very informal, formal meeting in a cafe and talked about the idea. And Cornelius told me, "Yeah, do you think we can do that in half a year? Because like my attention span might not be longer than that." And I'm like, "Okay, like yeah, let's try," because we had no clue. We played board games and we loved board games, but we had no clue in what we are getting ourselves into. And then we started, and that topic just never came up again. Like, I think we were both so obsessed to make it perfect that it just became years. And like we both never in that process, or at least Cornelius never mentioned like, okay, we have to get it done. We both worked just relentless and tireless until it was done. And like at one point we looked at each other and I think we both felt like, okay, now is the time that we are able to come out of our developer cave and show it to the world. And then we went to like our very first board game convention in Berlin. Yeah, fun times afterwards to Essen, like a crazy, absolutely crazy ride.
Absolutely. We also had to, I think, learn to kill our darlings.
Oh, that was hard. Yeah.
We went through so many versions of the game with so many different rule refinements and like turn orders and economic systems. And that was fun because we got to learn new games, right? It was just like being a board gamer. That you always learned a new thing, but then you had to strangle the ones that didn't work. I had some beloved ideas that had to die, and I could still remember them, but I would bore you with my dead darlings. But they're waiting for another game, a slower, more boring game.
Right. The cards had to go.
Was it ever an option? Because I know you came out full bang with all the design components. I mean, this is really out the door. You just came out with really superlative stuff for the first incarnation, which is not always the case for first-time developers here. Did you ever have was it ever an option to do this with lesser quality components, or did you just know just to go all out from the beginning?
We were definitely fully invested in the highest quality because it's our probably, we're not going to make 30 games at the speed we go because we really like taking time. So every game should be awesome. And I think we spent at least a year, maybe more, depending on how you want to stretch it, learning about how to make good components. So like that was part of the game design education we gave ourselves.
Yeah, on top of that, I mentioned that once, we basically did the game for us, right? Like and we wanted to play with the best possible components ourselves. So it was never we never did market research, like what's the target audience or something like that. We made the game that we truly love and would consider the best game out there for us. We were lucky enough that it resonated with so many other people. I mean, that's awesome, but like I think that was always our design philosophy. We if we didn't like it, or like if we wanted to do something stupid like 3D miniature curses in our last Kickstarter with like acrylic ice bases, we did it because we wanted them for our game. And
right.
I think that's a good way to do anything. Do it like you yourself want to have it for yourself. So.
Right. What was, I guess my other question is then why cooperative? I mean, this is another difference between most of the other 4Xs out there. I mean, it's clearly dominated by the competitive scene. What made you do co-op?
We just like each other too much, and like we
don't want to ruin the friendships.
Yeah, like I like in my gaming career, and like maybe I was more competitive when I was younger, but like I don't get anything out of like winning against Cornelius or Pavel. Like that's like I'd absolutely rather share victory with the two of them or go down with like how do you say that, Cornelius? You go down blazing
in a blaze of glory.
In a blaze of glory. So yeah, I'm extremely happy we did cooperative. I think as a gamer, I just stopped to play competitive games completely. Like
that completely stands to reason. That's been our experience here, where I can get this game to the table much more often because there's so many people who just don't like losing, or they get knocked out of the game early, and they're just sitting there, while everybody else plays. That's kind of been my experience with Uprising, is I can get more people involved, much more easily because of that lack of competitiveness. So that from my standpoint, it was a good choice in design here. Any other thoughts to add on that, Cornelius?
It's a rules challenge to make an AI that's also a board game. And generally, the simpler we made the rules, just like everything else, the better it got. But that also was a big haul to really refine how bad the bad guys are. And I think one of the big complaints we often hear is that the game is really crushing, and that is correct. The game is crushing, but that's by design, because it should feel like a real victory when you win. And I think everyone does. When you win at Uprising, you feel it.
Yeah, that's quite an understatement again as well, because I was just going to ask, the biggest complaint you received. I was guessing that was probably going to be the difficulty, and it is challenging, and there are people, but then my other question I was going to lead off of that then is like, how difficult is too difficult? Because now you have, normal difficulty, then Nightmare Apocalypse, then you have the expansions come out. And now all of a sudden you have the Arch Nemesis, which is a big boss that shows up at the end. And then after that expansion, there's the Titans expansion. Now we have these Banes that are on every single Legion and Horde. I mean, you think it was bad in the first incarnation, and then all of a sudden you find out this is not even as bad as it can get. It's like, where do you stop that line? How far does it go before people just, feel like this is just way too much?
Maybe there is no stopping. If we make more baddies, they have to be baddier, because everyone will be getting better every year that we're all playing together. So it has to be something really epically challenging if more stuff like that were to come out. I mean, Dirk, how many games of Uprising have we played? 100, 1,000, a million?
Yeah.
I don't know. So we can beat the Apocalypse game with, I think, slightly better than 50% chance. And that feels pretty hard to me, I gotta say.
You really have to, I find, just know everything that's going on the table. You can't take an eyes off of any area of the board, really. I find it's just, if you're just focusing on with cards in front of you, on your own player board, you're going to miss the opportunities. So, I mean, that's the one thing that I find about the game is it really keeps you engrossed on the whole playing field rather than what's in front of you.
Yeah. I also get monadic with my own cards, and I forget about the other things, and then I completely miss, I should have done that thing. But you can only blame yourself or the dice. You can blame the dice.
Well, thankfully, go ahead, Dirk.
Just to add to that, our design philosophy, if we played a cooperative game and we could just beat it in the very first play, it never came back to the table again. We wanted a real challenge. We wanted to challenge ourselves. I think if we play a cooperative game, we are really looking for a challenge, unfortunately for people. And years later, and I recently talked about that topic with Cornelius, I said it's actually from a marketing perspective stupid to make a complicated game, because you will get these ones on BGG, or people will just rant because they can't stomach getting a kick in the teeth. I think one of the reviewers said Uprising goes from 0 to 100 in a super short time. And it's basically we're splitting the audience, or the gamers that encounter Uprising some will absolutely hate it, and they will just say it's totally random, which like is unfortunate, or they will just not like it because it feels unfair, or it feels super swingy, or like they say like, oh, it's just the luck of the dice, and after one play they will table it, and like it's a game that demands to be played a couple of times, which is in the current state of the industry with the cult of the new and like something shiny coming around every new day. Like when people tell me that they played Uprising twice, I'm already proud, because how many new games come to your table like on a regular basis, and like still there we definitely wanted to have a challenge, so we are challenging everybody else on top of that. And it's not swingy. I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, it might feel like that.
Yes,
it's also not random, so it hurts to hear that. And like, I would love to prove them wrong, but to prove them wrong, I had to demand, why don't you just play it 100 times like me, and then you will come to a very different.
Yeah.
So
well, and
there's nothing I can do.
Yeah, and I've had this dialogue with you before as well here, because I know that some reviewers, like you said, review the game, and they come with an assessment after playing only once. And for some games, I can understand you can come to that conclusion. This one, I say, like you said, you have to play this one more than once to understand what's going on. I've used this analogy with you before. It's like a medical textbook. You can't bash the textbook itself if you're in med school if you don't understand the concepts within the textbook. Maybe after you have formulated an idea in your head, oh, this is how this works, this is how this works, then you can go back and say, okay, this textbook was worded poorly, this is bad writing. But if you don't understand the concepts itself, it's not the book's fault necessarily. And for Uprising, I feel that analogy is the best thing I can say about this, is it's like, the first time, you're probably not going to get it. You might have to go and read this textbook or board game or play the game multiple times before it starts to click. How many times would you say, if people were trying out this game, would be ideal for them to kind of go before just saying, this doesn't work for me? Is there any, can you do this after just one game, or, do you need a little bit more time?
I think you will figure out after we often see that people understand how the game works after one chapter. After one chapter, you saw everything, and then usually you know what you do. And I think you already know after the first game if you love it or if you hate it. I think that's something that we often see. Some people just absolutely don't like it after the first game, which is fine, and some other people absolutely love it, and they also love it to get a kick in the teeth from it. I think one of my favorite stories was like one reviewer played it with his girlfriend, and they stopped the game at one point and were really frustrated. But then his girlfriend, like while they were getting ready for bed and brushing their teeth, kept talking about what they could have made better. And I think that's just the beauty of a game. If you have to figure out yourself what you can do to improve or to get better. So I think you will get the grip very, very quick if you just bring it to the table 2 or 3 times, if it's your game.
Any thoughts, Cornelius, or
2?
That's the exact right number.
To answer your question, I think if you bring it twice and you hate it, you are totally forgiven for walking away from both of us. Like if you tried it twice, like
I can see that being the case. I know that for me, if I was just going to score this game after one play, and thankfully I played it more than once before I scored, I probably would have given it around initially a 7.5. I remember thinking that. But like you said, Dirk, when we started talking about it and realizing what we could do differently, and then all of a sudden it starts to click what you can do, more plays you get, more you realize what you can do and how cards interact with each other. And it's not necessarily immediately apparent, until you see like every card in the deck, every item, when you start to see the combinations of possibilities that are available. I'll talk about one of them later. But for me, I found that I appreciated it. It went from being like a 7.5, and then an 8, and then 9, 9.5, and then with the most recent expansion, haven't officially reviewed it yet, but now it's knocked it into the 10 territory for me. So it's I to get the full benefit of that, I found I really needed at the time. And I understand people's times are limited; they don't necessarily have the capacity to go through all that. But I think it does bear mentioning that just a little bit of time goes a long way in this game. But speaking of which, for the Titans expansion, how often do you have to respond to people thinking that you made a misprint on the Horde and Legion decks for the cards there? Two, I'm thinking of the Shapeshifter and the Imperial Juggernaut.
Yeah, for a while, it was once a day.
or more often. Like, like our policy was not to tell people stuff. Like, nobody is going to tell you that Ice Wastes will, like, I think, 99% of the time spawn skeletons. And so once going into the game and once you have played a little bit, you will figure out, okay, we really have to be careful and tracking the amount of skeletons, how many skeletons are in reserves and that stuff. And like our policy was like not to tell you all these things. We wanted that players discover that stuff themselves. So we said, like, we are not going to go on BGG and give like strategy advice, for example, or tell people what to do. Unfortunately, that policy did not work out when it comes to making a Horde with a Legion back and a Legion with a Horde back, although we still think that's an absolutely hilarious idea. But yeah, that was a big oopsie. Like, we should, like, that should be like in red, probably a sticker on the box, or like at least somewhere.
There's some sort of warning sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then there's going to be two types of people who didn't write us. There's going to be people who like understood immediately. And then there's some people who just don't know or don't care, and they're like, yeah, whatever. And they just put it in like, I would like to play a game with somebody who had that like thought. It's like, oh yeah, I'll just play with whatever gets spit out of the deck. Because that sounds like a very casual and fun way to play the game.
Yeah, I know at least one person out there, I've checked the forums various places, but has made an analogy and compared the game to like Mage Knight, and I'm one of those people that kind of is in agreement in this, that in terms of expansion content, Mage Knight had this good thing going. They only released expansions when I found that merited it, and I'm finding that same progression happening here with Uprising. It's like a really great game, and each expansion is adding. As much as I think it's going to ruin the game, like potentially, there's always that potential exists. And I've encountered so many where, it actually makes the game lesser with each expansion. And it's only gotten better with Uprising. But how much farther do you think you can push the line with this game before it capsizes?
I don't think we'll try and capsize. Yeah, I think we will avoid capsizing if at all possible. Dirk, what do you say?
Yeah, I think it capsized. Like I think there's no room for, like, for example, like new mechanics. We had this, and like because you're very right, and like we are experienced gamers, and we have the exact same experience that a lot of expansions do not make the game better; they just bloat it. And like we were very aware of that, and we had like what I love most about Uprising, it's very crunchy, but it's like the headspace is still very nice. It's like not the brain burner of like a heavy Euro game, and like I just don't think that Cornelius and I are like oftentimes people also, like, as you made the comparison to Mage Knight, a lot of people often said we are the Ameritrash version of Spirit Island, and that makes me very happy. Like, I'd rather play an Ameritrash 4X co-op game where I don't have to overthink or like be paralyzed for 30 minutes. So I really like the mind space, or like the headspace that you are in if you're playing it. You still can manage. There are so many opportunities. There are so many options. Like, it's so exciting, and like you can do something, and like you don't have to like think for like 20 minutes before you make a move. And when we were designing the expansion, we oftentimes came to this point where we felt like we are leaving that headspace. It gets a little bit too much, and I think and then we cut the stuff that was going above that, like that spot that I really like, and for like expanding the game with further expansions, like I cannot see more mechanics or like another sideboard. That was our running gag, like no sideboard, no more sideboard, no more other thing to track. It's like in this version it's really enough. So I think if we're going to expand it, like we have to expand it inside the realm or inside the rules that we already have established. Like nobody will complain about 10 more hordes or 5 more factions or something
right.
like that.
And for me, I'm talking about your last expansion for the Titans. It came with, you had the option of getting the Allies card pack. And I know with some of the other little mini expansions, it's just a set of like 10 cards, 20 cards sometimes. But for those of the people who felt like the game was perhaps a little bit too isolated, which it can be, the Allies expansion here, there's a little pack of 10 cards, or no, so not 10, a little bit more than that. But each faction gets 2 allies, which lets you use those cards as starting cards. But basically now you have much more interaction, I find, where you're not just, unless you're a certain faction in the original game, sometimes it was very hard to have an effect on things on the opposite side of the board. But you had a simple solution. It was just a few cards that it brought a whole level of depth to it that you didn't really have to consider before. And I think you don't have to overthink it, like you said. You just can't. We were very pragmatic about this to just, this is how people can have more an effect on what else is going on in the board here without getting, like you said, obtuse and overbearing with overloading everything on the table here.
In the end,
that was one of the expansion parts that I think we spent the most time on thinking about how to fit it into the existing realm of things, because that was probably the most likely to have a sideboard. Dirk, do you remember one time there was an alliance track?
At the very beginning, I love
many
that.
centuries ago.
Yeah.
And it's such a lovely idea for simulating, tribes of people that don't really know each other. Like, are we friendly enough to shake hands or trade rocks or magic spells? But in the end, the simplest thing we could make was to just expand existing rules for each individual hero, and that also was good. We tried a few different combinations where you could pick and choose from these things, or they were specific to a race. But it like part of the joy of that game is how individual each hero plays. Even though they have 6 feats in common, they're still only in common with another member of the race, and so giving them one more unique card also made them feel like even more like that sort of hero's journey thing.
Yeah. Is there any, speaking of the heroes and factions, we briefly talked about this in an email, but I mean, what are your favorites?
Like Pavel is not here, but Pavel is Cornelius' former roommate. And since this was going on for years, and like oftentimes at Cornelius' place, like we just, Pavel just grew into like designing it with us, because we always like pulled him into like, we have to play test. So, and at a very early stage, we each had our signature faction, which was the Dirk for Pavel, and it was the Crow for me. So,
yep.
For you, Cornelius?
It was not the humans for me. This is a little secret. Every time I play a game, I always have a problem with the humans. So I was able to play Syndra, my favorite D&D character of all time, as my hero in the Druin. And so, of course, she's my favorite so much. I love that card. I love that character. I love that faction.
Yeah, that's. I'm inclined to agree with the Druin and Syndra. That's usually when I'm breaking myself back into the game here. That's the first race faction I gravitate to for that versatility. What is your least favorite horde or legion to pop up?
I feel triggered. I have to think of all the bad times I had.
For me, it's always the Butcher. Okay, I always get that the start of the round, and immediately half of my action points gone. Just boom. I think I've only had it once where it happened at the end of the round, and I didn't care. For me, it's definitely the Butcher.
Jeez, for me, it's always been the Coven of Esax that just takes my AP, and then usually, if somebody manages to hop on the horde, then you can get it back. But sometimes it sits there for 2 or even 3 rounds, and that's devastating. I look so angrily at him walking around holding my action point.
I do remember that, like, for many, many games, it was the running gag that the first horde that came out was always the Stormbringer. So we are kind of traumatized by that because it's horrible. Like, especially early on, like we had a couple of games where the Stormbringer just outright marched into the capital and murdered 2 or 3 legions.
Yes, that's happened before.
Like, besides of that, like, I had, and I think we nerfed them along the way, but for like a very, very long time, the Imperial Guard was my like when the Imperial Guard comes out, when the Empire has a strong grip on the game, and they just add like 9 garrisons to the board. That can be really problematic. And I think they were for a very long time the only Horde and Legion who had 6 dice at the highest level or at higher levels. So, like, yeah, I love and hate the Imperial Guard.
Go ahead, Cornelius.
Oh yeah. They've all been pretty horrible, but the one that was the least memorable was the Warlock for the Imperial Teleporter, and for a long time, we just didn't really have a great ability for him. But then sort of just before we kickstarted, we had a brilliant idea to make him really exciting and memorable. So I'm actually very proud of how bad he was and now how good he is. He's still not, the meanest one on the board, but he definitely is less boring than he used to be.
Yeah, he can catch you off guard very easily still. So that's, if you're not paying attention. So, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Then the last, just moving on to the territory about more recent faction. The Imperial Juggernaut. Okay, that has been the most eye-opening new experience probably about the Titans expansion. I mean, this guy, biggest surprise. I don't want to spoil anything for people, but you haven't played this, but just be prepared for that one. If you just assume you're just gonna walk in on his little parade there, just maybe think again. That was I found that was a very clever design. He definitely catches your attention very quickly. Along the same lines you said about the Stormbringer, he's got that capacity to just change things very quickly.
Yeah, he doesn't care about you at all. He's just there to make points for the Empire.
Yeah, and that was an interesting devising strategy, is just to deal with him and only him, because it soon becomes the focal point if you're not prepared.
Kudos to one of our fans, which, like, initial idea that was he wanted to have a Legion who goes after a Chaos, and we spent a lot of time to make it work, and I think we had so many complicated ways to do it, and in the end we just said okay, he's just gonna hop to the next horde or to the weakest horde, and that again worked, but it took us a long time to figure that out.
Because we don't want to break the sort of fantasy world. So how does he get there? And then I assume he just sort of flies there with rockets, and that sort of led to a mythology that maybe these things were a very advanced form of magic that Dracori had. Maybe there were more of them. Maybe the capital is surrounded by them and they've all been destroyed. There's only one left. And so then suddenly this one Legion accumulates a little bit of world building around him, just because we had to solve the verisimilitude of the movement issue, which I thought was really fun. How the game kind of reveals itself to you even as you're designing it. Of course this has to be here. Then you write it down. You're it's so smart, but it wasn't you. It was the game that told you.
When did it come about? Obviously we were talking about the factions, the enemy factions, the legions and the hordes. When did it come about, or how did it come about that you wanted to pit the players against 2 enemies rather than 1?
That was all Dirk.
Was it?
Yeah, that was your idea. I told you that was a crazy idea, Dirk. Remember, it was one of the many things I said was crazy.
You told me that I'm crazy many times, and I proved you right. This was in there from the very beginning. I do remember we were sitting on the couch on your balcony, at the very, very beginning. I don't know, that was part from the very, very beginning that we wanted to have like two enemy factions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why.
The
game told us.
Yeah, the game did tell us. It changes the balance of how you're calculating, because I guess in any games where there's only one enemy, which is most co-op games, you can kind of box it in, but it's really hard to box in two factions, and so then it feels like you're in the middle of a multiplayer game. And I didn't think it could work, and we spent years refining that system. But I think it came out great. I feel so challenged by both the factions that if I'm beating one, then the other one's going to come right back and put a boot up my butt.
or they're beating each other, which I like. That's probably my favorite part of the game, that we somehow made it work, that they can also like battle each other, which was like a total surprise to many new players. They were like, when they discovered that they also fight against each other. Some people hear that and they say like, oh, that seems to be very tedious, and like people discover it and like, no, that's very exciting. And like, it's like, for me personally, it's the best part of the game that they can do that. Nothing better than the Stormbringer marching into the capital and like watch him murder 3 legion. It's just like hilarious. I think we also at one point came to a game state where we didn't care about winning or losing. We had just fun watching,
taking bets, you know.
Yeah, or like what unfolds here before our eyes. That's also like the beauty of game. I mean, I'm getting excited. That like I don't know how many games you played, 500 to 1,000, somewhere in that realm. And like up until this day, sometimes stuff happens that we could not have predicted, or that we did not thought was possible. Like you have maybe played, or you saw the Undernest, like the secret outpost of the Nethersea pirates in the Nethersea. In one game, somehow the game managed to spawn 2 skeletons there. Don't know how. And then all skeletons activate. And we looked at it, and we saw that every unit on the Undernest is adjacent to every hex in game. So these 2 skeletons just marched right into a haven, and that was just hilarious, and something that we were looking at each other like flabbergasted or so surprised, and like maybe that's my favorite thing, that like even after like 500 to 1,000 games, the game does stuff to us that surprises us. Like as if it has a life on its own in a way. Like, I love that.
Yeah. What's the craziest thing that you've seen happen in the game? And then
that's the craziest thing that I personally, because like there were so many question marks in the process. Like we looked at the card, and then we looked at the hex, and then we looked at the game state, and they had to spawn there. I don't even remember why, because like probably my subconscious just like eradicated it from, or trying to eradicate it from my memory, because it was so traumatic. And then all these next step that follows, like I think at one point we were just laughing because it was so like ridiculous. But that to me personally was the most insane thing that happened. I kept mentioning the Stormbringer marching into the capital. That seems to be a close second. Cornelius.
Yeah, I've seen the Stormbringer like wipe out the Empire single-handedly, but that also means that you have a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah.
I think maybe the craziest thing I saw recently, because there's been so many things, but the Magebreaker appeared on a sea tower.
Sea towers,
that has, that just produces a legion, and so then he immediately put his target on somebody's haven, but then he had one of those banes that activates him, so he left. And I think he went to another sea tower, which is where the haven was, because it was the only empty one, blew it up, the tower that he had just left, killed the haven, then retargeted and blew up the tower he was on. And so everyone lost every sea tower instantly. And he was ready to crush us completely. And it was such a turnaround. We're like, all right, we got these sea towers open. I'm going to get this one. And like, bam, bam, nope, everything's gone. And we were just reeling from that one move. It was a 2-player with me and Pavel, I think.
Yeah. No, those sea towers, I mean, they have the lure and appeal of just you want to get there right away. But then when the enemy gets them, you better watch out. It's one of the things you've really got to watch out for, I find. For me, this happened a few weeks ago. I think I was playing. We were definitely lagging behind the game a bit. I was the Huquan. I remember, and I just happened by fortuitous chance get one of the item cards. I think it was the Architects, one of the ones that lets you build basically whenever you have a tower, it lets you use all the towers that are adjacent to your commanding hex, add those dice to the wherever you're fighting. So I ended up, I had my Huquan spell spread out all over. I teleported and approached the Imperial capital from multiple angles, and that had totally surrounded by towers. And not only that, so I had the Huquan, and I had the feat where it lets you, add the dice for each adjacent hex you come from. I had the Empire was just fully loaded, but there's no other solution to beat the game, and catch up. In addition to that, I think we placed a curse there, so that way they couldn't retaliate with the lightning bolts. So I just jumped in, teleported for the Quan. I had 12 dice just from the start, just against in the archery phase, and I just wiped out the entire garrison on the Empire, all the legions, 5 legions. And one,
it's an epic strategy.
Without losing a single unit or taking the damage on my end, and it was crazy, but we still lost. It was 2 points away. But that's one I'll talk about for the ages. It was
that's
still lost after that. Oh no!
Oh no! But that's still amazing. And if you it's the story. The game writes sometimes. Well, we hear from a dad telling us that he played it with his son or sons or daughters or children, and that they together lived through such an epic moment or story that will be a memory for them forever. And that's super rewarding for me. I love that's the best thing. Doing it, I love these memories that you form with other people. I think that's to hear these stories is very rewarding. So to hear yours is rewarding as well. If that is a memory that we will have for a very long time, that's epic.
2 more questions. Any new games or ideas in your head on the horizon, or are they hush hush or?
Oh, Dirk, don't you want to say how many good ideas we have, and they're all very hush hush?
Yeah, we have endless good ideas, but they are also very hush hush or not so far developed that we could really talk about them. I think it's an open secret that we would love to do a big box solution, because now with 3 boxes, we found ourselves in the situation that it's tedious to get everything from these 3 boxes. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is we were also at least it's maybe 2 or 3 weeks that really everything has become more silent. But before that, it's also we always said we wanted to give the full focus to fulfilling the campaign. And the campaign, I think, is fulfilled now everybody has everything, including all the little bits and pieces that were sometimes I don't know how many pieces, but it's a couple of 100 pieces in a box. Of course there are sometimes something is missing, or you don't have level 2 garrisons but 2 times level 3 garrisons. With that many parts, it's just inevitable that you get these mistakes. And we just spent months, and mainly Cornelius packing little packages with a single garrison, or a card or something that is missing. So the support we wanted to give to the community, since it's basically that just the 2 of us doing it full time, was also that also just took a lot of time. So there was also not that much time, but we are full of good ideas. And I a big box solution. That's an open secret that we want to do it. And we also spent a lot of time trying to find the best solution, which is challenging, because from the very beginning, that was a demand, or at least a hot topic. Some people praise our inserts as the best they have ever seen. Some people are very keen to develop their own, or in their view, better storage solution to get, for example, like everything from our 3 boxes into one box, and like they achieved it. It's absolutely hilarious what's going on our Discord, like people sharing that and then sharing the 3D files and then printing it and doing other solutions. It's we know that if we offer a big box solution, it has to be perfect. Like we did with Uprising, like we did with the expansion. Like I think our like standards to ourselves are very high. So it's a real challenge. It's not apocalypse mode, but it's nightmare mode to design a big box solution for Uprising.
Yeah, Dirk's a little shy. We've done a lot of prototyping on a lot of different things, and I guess that's kind of the unglamorous part of like designing a physical product. It's like, you got to get samples, and like, that didn't work. So just like designing a game, and whatever else we have in mind, we spend a lot of time doing it. I think it comes out pretty good. So we would never offer anything that we didn't think was a perfect product. So we're getting there.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel the need for a storage solution these days, because it says 3 boxes. They fit well within their own individual box, but my table is definitely filling some of these moments. Last question, and again, obviously I understand you're a little bit biased, but what's your favorite game that's not Uprising?
For me, for years it's been Terraforming Mars. And I pick up other games that I play more, but I think the game I have come back to since it came out is probably that single game. But there are lots and lots of good games. But I'll just stop at that one.
Okay.
Boy, it's tough.
It is.
It's of course Uprising, but I cannot pick Uprising. I loved Robinson Crusoe. That's a couple of years ago, but that got me back into gaming, so that has a special place in my heart as a cooperative pick. And like in a versus game, I love Star Wars Rebellion. Like I think that's an absolutely super banger.
It's so themey. Oh my god.
Now,
here's your space game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you definitely, for me, you rose to the top of my list. You knocked out my favorite genre, which is surprising. I'm usually the biggest on the dungeon crawls, so it was a bit of a surprise seeing you guys creep up to you've knocked out everything, and you've risen to our number 1 spot. So, congrats.
That's amazing.
That's wonderful.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah.
So, like you said, it brings the family together. It brings everybody together. We don't have to worry about hacking each other away. Just, gives us a common enemy to go against, and we all have a blast. So, thank you so much for coming and talking about your ideas, and we definitely look forward to having you again at some point. I have the reviews posted, on my links here in the description here, also to your website, and just, any other ideas we've shared regarding Uprising in the past. Thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. If we can now start with our questions.
Oh, sure. Go for it.
It's just one, but like, what would you like to see? Like, besides of a big box solution? Because that's, of course, always interesting to hear for us.
That is the ultimate need right now for the game. I don't think you need any more content development, to be honest. I think it sets at a stage, like I said, it's precarious. If you add too much to the balance right now, it can totter and collapse. So I know that Mage Knight only had a couple, like 2 or 3 expansions, that they did, and they kind of know they stayed put. So from content development, I think it's at a precarious spot where then you have to counterbalance that. Well, can this new content or design or idea fit into the new storage solution as well? As a danger I'd be aware of. I don't know if I'd want to change anything. I thought about the idea of maybe, what if people wanted to do it competitively, and if a rule set for that were in place. But I think that that would alienate the core audience to a degree, because a lot of the game I feel is about is about coming together to face these insurmountable odds. So it is a hard idea for me to come up with one specific thing. Obviously you could say more factions, but you've pushed so many ideas. I thought, like, after the first 4 factions, when I saw the Nemesis factions come out, I thought you were already pushing a line there, because he had the 4 basic factions from the original game, and the next expansion, the Nemesis one, built upon, okay, you have an understanding of the basic rules. Now it breaks them. For each faction, just kind of breaks the rules in their own way. I thought that was a great idea, and because they think the Hakuan, obviously they can only have 3 havens. They can't build them right next to each other, but they're super strong. They each all have these ideas they're kind of game breaking, but something to offset that. The Titans expansion, you had again 2 more factions, and you broke the mold again, thinking that one of them essentially playing as a boss, for the duration of the game. And the pirates, definitely have some very unique movements. Maybe my one suggestion was not so much for content or rules change, but one thing I did notice for the Nether Sea pirates is that the blade ships were perhaps a bit too big. And especially if they started piling on each other, then you have your units on the same hex too. I maybe suggest a deluxe component that maybe made them a little bit more, they could stack on top of each other more, kind of like a havens, because the havens, are round and but something maybe that allows them to stack so they're not, just all in this big giant cluster with everything. Maybe was one suggestion I was going to offer. That would aesthetically, like, just as much of a crowd pleaser as the, your curse, your curses, the deluxe curses you offered. But from gameplay, I really don't think I would add too much other than a few new item cards or maybe quests. Maybe it's a quest to diversify things. I think that sometimes or the chapters, the events. Once you play through the game, I think maybe it could use some more events that shake things up a bit. But in terms of mechanics, I don't think there's a lot I would change.
Yeah, me neither. Are you ready for the bonus question?
Sure.
Which arch nemesis do you fear the most?
I've come to decide. I can definitely come to terms with handling the Kraken. That's the one thing I actually want to shape for. We've discovered how to easily control that situation. The Empress is probably the one we learned that just avoid at all costs. Just if you can shape the events, from drawing from the bag, anything you possibly do, just make sure that's not the Empress that comes out, because that one just brutalizes, any chances of victory that we have coming our way. I mean, if you're planning on securing those points from feeding her, it's probably not going to happen for us. That's the one we definitely stay away from.
Thank you very much for the input and feedback and answers.
Yeah, not a problem. All right. Well, look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you so much for your time, and we will probably look forward to having you again at some stage. So
absolutely.
Thanks again. Cornelius.
Bye, Dirk.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, guys. Thanks for listening. Bye.